So let's do Julieta, which is the new film by Pedro Almodovar. There is a season on at BFI South Bank at the moment, which is a retrospective of Almodovar's work. I think it's his 20th film, something like that. It is inspired by 3 short stories by Alice Munro, and at one point was considered to be done in the English language. But what he did was he then took the material and brought it back to Spain and, you know, to some extent brought it home. And I think I'm an Almodovar fan anyway. But I thought this was his best film since Volver. The story is we meet a middle-aged woman, Julieta, played by Emma Suarez, who is on the point of leaving Madrid to go off for a new life. Then, with her boyfriend Lorenzo, then she meets a former childhood friend of her estranged daughter, Antje, who tells her something about her estranged daughter. And she suddenly decides that actually she's not going to do what she did before, because she hasn't seen her daughter in years and years, since her daughter voluntarily disappeared from her life. What she actually does is go back to the apartment in which they once lived and says that she is going to write the story of their odyssey. We then move back to the 1980s, at which point Adriana Ugarte takes over the role of the younger Julieta. And we then see the story of her on a train and a couple of brief encounters, her relationship with a Galician fisherman, the birth of her daughter, and the sort of almost Greek tragedy-like separation from her daughter, and how all these events played out. Greek myth plays quite a lot of part in this, because she's a scholar of those stories. As I said, Alice Munro is the source material, but there's a lot of Patricia Highsmith in this. Funnily enough, there's a lot of Hitchcock in it, which you kind of wouldn't expect, because although what it really is, it's an emotional story. It sort of plays almost as if it's a thriller. There are moments of Alberto Iglesias' score which I thought very definitely seemed to refer to Bernard Herrmann, or sort of, called up that kind of those classic cues. There is one character at one point says he fears that he is becoming a Patricia Highsmith obsessive. So that is very, very specifically flagged up. But what the film basically does is it's a study of loss and grief and silence. It's really a film about silence and the damaging effects of silence, and how silence between characters who have, issues and love and passion between them, not talking about those things, can cause grief and ongoing tragedy. It's also about the viral nature of guilt, about how guilt can be passed from one generation to another completely inadvertently, all of which makes it sound like something which is, a very, very difficult film to watch, but it isn't. The reason it isn't is partly because it has such brilliant performances. I mean, the dual lead performances are absolutely, superb. There's a wonderful switch between the two in which, actually, I won't even describe it because it's been there. There is the way in which we move from one character to the other is brilliantly done. But the most important thing is that what Almodovar does is, because he understands the language of cinema, because he understands that cinema is a visual medium, and he understands visual storytelling, almost better than anybody else working in this particular area. We start in the film with this close-up on these folds of red cloth. It looks like maybe a heart pumping, maybe it's a flower. It turns out to be a dress. The color red and the color blue are absolutely key all the way through to storytelling, to the relationship between past and present. The design of the rooms in which the drama plays out, a white, sparse room with clearly delineated lines in which what our central character is trying to do is to expunge memory, to move on from memory, to deliberately forget things, contrasted with an apartment which is full of clutter and noise, in which memories of the past seem to live vividly, brought to life as she writes on a white page. It's funny because Almodovar has said that the thing that's different about this for him is that, firstly, that there isn't any humor in it. It's not a film which mixes genres, and it's not a film which he sees as being a melodrama. It's a film which he sees as being a drama. And that's absolutely true in terms of the reality of the emotions and the emotional tenor. But there is something operatic about the way in which he directs, which means that the film feels thoroughly full-blooded. I mean, that red, there's a reason that red courses all the way through the film, this sort of thicker than water theme, which ties all these disparate threads together. And the film juggles these different time periods in a way which is beautifully done. So it never just feels like what you've got is a latter-day wraparound and a flashback. What it feels like is that the past and present are living and intermingled. There is also a sense of desperation in there. At times I was reminded of George Slaughter's Spoorloos rather than The Vanishing, which is the remake, in terms of that sense of a life defined by the absence of a loved one, somebody who has disappeared, somebody who's disappeared without trace and inexplicably so. But the thing that I took away from it most was just the sheer emotional impact of it. I mean, I had that wonderful feeling of being in a cinema and the movie sweeping over me, and everything about it, from the ravishing score to the superbly judged performances to the costume and set and art direction and set design being absolutely in sync with the storytelling, to the way in which Almodovar had managed to intertwine the source material stories with his own recurrent concerns, to the fact that it was a film that looks back over Almodovar's career and draws elements from those early movies. I mean, in her younger years, Julieta could have stepped out of Women on the Verge or Pepe Lucci Bomb, well, perhaps not that, but and all those things are drawn together in this, this great, passionate, heartfelt operatic sweep. I know some people have been slightly lukewarm about it. I've read some reviews that refer to it as an incidental work. I disagree. I thought it was magnificent.
I think that might be the movie of the week. I mean, I realise we're 10 minutes ahead.
Sorry.
You still...
Sorry, I just rambled for... I'm so sorry. I went off on one.